I'm not afraid of any topic, or I wouldn't walk away from any topic because it was, a controversial topic. And I wouldn't run towards any topic because it was controversial. There's a story I want to tell. It's all about how you do it, not what you do. And there's no reason on earth that games should be, restricted to a certain set of topics. Elizabeth is female for a bunch of reasons, not male, but some characters could go either way, and I just sort of go, I don't know, what do I feel like writing today? What kind of voice do I want? What kind of tone do I want? And I just sort of go from there.
The success of Bioshock put Irrational Games in the spotlight once again. After the closure of Looking Glass Studios, Ken and the team had made a name for themselves. However, now owned by 2K Games, many devs from Irrational moved to various 2K studios around the world, and Irrational was renamed to 2K Boston and 2K Australia, meaning a bigger, more widespread studio. When it came to creating the next in the series, the original team, and even Ken, took a bit of a backseat to things. A new approach was perhaps needed, maybe because of how development became such a rushed job towards the end of creating Bioshock. Bioshock 2 was developed by 2K Marin, a new Bay Area studio. In 2007, the studio started out with 8 core team members, many from Irrational Studios, until they added 78 additional team members at peak development. What came across from the team members at 2K Marin is that they wanted to fix all the mistakes of the first game and create a better gameplay experience for the player, whether it was removing the pipe dream minigames, better combat by allowing the player to use both a gun and plasmids at the same time, or adding more cutscenes and pushing the tech of the game a lot more. In this entry into the series, the main protagonist would be a major change too. In Bioshock 2, you play as a Big Daddy known as Subject Delta, and the game starts 2 years before the events of Bioshock 1. In the opening scene, Subject Delta gets separated from its little sister, Eleanor, who is found by her real mother, Sophia Lamb, and by using a mind control plasmid, she instructs Subject Delta to shoot himself. The remaining events of the game would take place 10 years later, way after the ending to Jack's time in Rapture, and sees the protagonists go on the hunt for Eleanor and the mother who tried to take and break the special Big Daddy little sister bond between them. It was a major change to Bioshock from the first entry into the series, but saw players see a new side of Rapture, a glimpse into the past, its future, and of course, the Big Daddies themselves.
For a special message from Andrew Ryan.
Good evening, my friends. I hope you are enjoying your New Year's Eve celebration. It has been a year of trials for us all.
Along with the single-player storyline, a new first for the series was being developed for Bioshock. Digital Extremes, now famous for their hugely popular free-to-play title, Warframe, took charge of creating a multiplayer mode for Bioshock 2. This would see players in another series of events that were yet to be explored in Bioshock. The multiplayer mode was set in the events leading up to the first game, where all hell was about to break loose on Rapture. Despite it being a new mode to Bioshock, the online multiplayer was seen positively by fans, and was seen as a welcome addition alongside the single player mode.
So these two had a relationship, and it was a relationship that I think people could relate to. I think it's a relationship that, I think you see an echo of when you go to some kind of to a gaming con, and you see fathers and daughters cosplaying them. And to me, this is one of my favorite things, because as weird and screwed up as that Big Daddy little sister relationship is, there's something there that people can connect to. There's an affection between the two. And in a first-person shooter, you're generally not used to seeing affection.
Despite Ken Levine having some input into Bioshock 2, he wasn't lead writer this time around. Many speculated that Ken was pushed aside due to the issues of Bioshock 1's development, but when asked about why he wasn't behind Bioshock 2's development, he had this to say. Levine told Eurogamer in 2010, "For me and the team, it was about not repeating ourselves. If you look at it, whether it's Final Fantasy, where one game in the series is very different to another, or even Alien and Aliens is a great example, two very different stories. One's a haunted house movie, and one's an action movie. For us, I think the guiding principle is, if they never stopped making horror movies where everything was a house on a haunted hill with lightning going in the sky, you'll never have The Shining, that antiseptic bright look. How do you create horror in that? That's what we're doing. We're always trying to challenge ourselves. We've done that. We've done the dark rooms, but that's a crutch, eventually, for the team. The reason we didn't do Bioshock 2 is because the time frame the game had, and the company understandably wanted another game in Rapture. But we felt we had said all we wanted to say about Rapture, about those kinds of environments and that kind of feel. We want to scare the hell out of people, we want to shock people, but we didn't have any of the tools, the crutches, that we knew how to do that with. I think it's a very talented team, and I think it fulfilled the mission of completing the story of Rapture. Bioshock 2 was released in February of 2010 to generally positive reviews. Combat was more enjoyable, and the problems that were noted in the first Bioshock seemed to be ironed out for many players. Bioshock 2's sales figures were just under Bioshock 1's first initial sales, and while the game is still praised by many today, it lacked that certain narrative touch that the first game was so well known for. While Bioshock 2 was being sold in stores, Ken Levine and the team at the now renamed back to its original name, Irrational Games, were cooking up something bigger than ever before, and one that would take us from the city under the sea to a city in the clouds.
(1893), the World's Columbian Exposition, a gathering of the greatest technological feats the world had ever seen. But one exhibit stood out above the rest: the floating city of Columbia. The result of the inexhaustible determination and vision of one man, Zachary Comstock.
Work began on a new Bioshock in February of 2008, 2 years before Bioshock 2's release. This time around, Ken would return as creative director and lead writer, along with Irrational Games developing the game and it being published by 2K Games. Working under the secret working title Project Icarus, Irrational Games would work on a new Bioshock game for a total of 5 years, with around 200 people working in the company. A major change for the series was talked about before starting development on whether or not to set the game in Rapture again, or to go for a different setting, a new setting. Rapture was absolutely considered, but the idea behind Infinite's new setting came from when Levine read the 2003 non-fiction book, The Devil in the White City.
Yeah, well, when we first determined that we were going to not go back to Rapture, that as a studio we had sort of said what we wanted to say about Rapture, we kicked around the idea of just like, what if we were to keep the core principles of Bioshock, but which, and for us, those core principles have always been two things. The core principles are that you have a very improvisational way of doing combat, meaning you have weapons in one hand and powers, whether they're plasmids in the first game or vigors in this game in the other hand, and character growth within your body, and a lot of improvisational elements in the world as well. That was the one core element we thought made Bioshock. And the other core element was having a very detailed, rich environment that was both fantastical, but also very grounded in reality. And so once we felt if we kept those elements, it would very much be a Bioshock game, but everything else was really up for grabs at that point. And the first thing we said was, what if we went into a very different time period? And the turn of the century was very attractive to us. A bunch of guys in the team had read a book called Devil in the White City, and they had turned me on to it, and which is about the 1893 World's Fair, which is an amazing book. And that period started really drawing us in. And if you looked at the sort of art of that period, especially the sci-fi art of that period, there was always these images of cities in the sky. The people, they thought they'd be living in cities in the sky, because at that time, the world had changed so much technologically in the 20-year period around there. In that 20-year period, these are some of the things that were introduced: electricity, airplanes, phonograph records, movies, cars, the list goes on and on, all these transformative technologies. So if you ask somebody back then, well, might we be living in cities in the sky in 10 years? They probably would have said, well, maybe, that sounds reasonable. And so you have all this great art about these cities, and that just really inspired us. And that was really the starting point. Then we sort of had to turn that into, Columbia and the specifics of, Booker and Elizabeth and all those other things that make Bioshock Infinite.
I kind of... Can we just try it? I know you don't want to.
I want to see you do it.
Oh, great. No pressure.
This time around as well, the team started to focus on voice acting and performance, with the two main characters, Booker DeWitt, played by Troy Baker, and the AI companion Elizabeth, played by Courtney Draper. Emotion and bond between the two characters was what the team was trying to achieve by having real-to-life characters in the game, rather than people just through audio diaries.
The benefits of working with a voice actor directly is, that sort of interactive process. There's a sequence where Troy's berating Courtney to get a certain performance, a moment we needed. And that wasn't just Troy being an asshole. That was, me asking Troy to help get Courtney to an emotional place. Whenever you're ready.
Okay.
So do you need something to build to it?
I'm thinking. I'm not just ignoring.
Help if he berated you a bit?
A what?
If he berated you a bit? Berated you?
Yeah, sure.
What, what were you doing? What were you thinking? You're never
Fucking
gonna
moron.
work. You're gonna get us fucking killed.
I like that.
Keep going.
Yeah, Troy, don't be afraid of it.
No, I'm not.
Really
I'm
go
not.
into her.
Yeah.
No, I just don't want you to stop.
Fucking child.
Shut up!
It's a Glenn Ross beating up.
Makes me so uncomfortable. Keep going.
I don't care if you're uncomfortable or not. Pull it the fuck together! You've either got this or you don't. The fuck were you thinking?
Keep at her, Troy. Keep at her.
No, she's got it. She just needs to fucking focus. Don't fucking laugh!
Okay, you were right. I can't control it. It's not possible.
With what I've seen lately, I wouldn't put a nickel on what's possible. Now, come on. I think it's time we found Comstock, okay?
Can we do it once more?
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Will you yell, you fucking psychopath? Will you scream at me a little more? And then be nice?
The inheritor of the mantle of the Big Daddy and Little Sister is not a monster, because that's not what made the Big Daddy that interesting. To me, the inheritor is her, is Elizabeth. Because this is a game, we're taking our next step as Irrational to bring the player into the narrative experience, and most importantly, where they were an observer of that experience with the Big Daddy and Little Sister, the goal here is to make them a participant of that experience. Now, Elizabeth is complicated, and I don't mean that personality-wise. I mean, she was an incredibly complicated entity to create, and even so, at the studio we call her Liz, and she's never called that in the game. And the reason we do that is because we've all grown to love her in a way, and that's because despite many, many months of walking into walls and falling through the ground and doing the wrong things and standing too close or standing too far, her eyes crossing, or all these like horrible things that can happen. She's really, she's always been the heart of this game.
At E3 2010, the first gameplay reveal of Bioshock Infinite was released to members of the press. The presentation was an early glimpse into the world of Columbia and painted a more brighter, more steampunky world than Rapture, but underneath, the problems of this world in regards to religion and politics were clear to see. The people who witnessed the demo were incredibly impressed. However, the finished product of the game would look and feel a lot different from this early demo. In fact, the team created so much content they had to cut from the game, they could have created enough material and assets for 5 or 6 more games. Some staff members of Irrational Games also left the studio before the completion of Bioshock Infinite, but they were eventually replaced to help finish the game.
We're here at the GameStop at 1282 Broadway, Times Square. coming here for the midnight launch Bioshock Infinite. We're going to get our copy signed right now.
After 5 years of development and many different versions of the game, Bioshock Infinite was released to the world in 2013. Just like the first Bioshock in the series, it was hugely praised by the press. A return to the story-driven gameplay that made the first Bioshock so memorable, it was also the biggest Bioshock launch to date in terms of sales. Although gunplay and movement was improved over the past 2 entries into the series, it was far from Bioshock Infinite's strong points. The game was well received for its crazy but memorable story, and so was the voice cast, adding more personal touch to the series with 2 main characters. A few months after the release of Infinite, Irrational Games announced 2 episodic DLCs for Bioshock Infinite, entitled Burial at Sea. The DLCs would, as Ken put it, give the player the complete story of the series and tie up all the loose ends and questions people had at the end of Infinite. Burial at Sea saw the player in an alternative timeline to Bioshock Infinite's setting, where, with the 2 main characters, Booker and Elizabeth, still involved, the game will be set in Rapture this time around. Fans enjoyed the return to Rapture, and critics mostly gave the DLC positive reviews, stating it was a nice ribbon on top to close out the series. Infinite was a massive project, and overall it didn't disappoint. It seemed like Bioshock could still be a long-running success after Infinite's release, but Ken, once again, had other ideas.
Damon here with IGN News. Bioshock creator Ken Levine has announced he is winding down his studio Irrational Games as we know it. After 17 years, Levine says he is interested in making a different kind of game than he ever has before. He says, to meet the challenge ahead, I need to refocus my energy on a smaller team with a flatter structure and a more direct relationship with gamers. In many ways, it will be a return to how we started, a small team making games for the core gaming audience. Levine will stick with publisher Take-Two, but all but 15 employees will be laid off. He explains, there's no great way to lay people off, and our first concern is to make sure that the people who are leaving have as much support as we can give them during this transition.
On February 18, 2014, Ken Levine announced Irrational Games would be closing down. He stated that Infinite's development had affected his health and personal relationships, and was looking forward to trying something new. On February 23, 2017, after leaving and closing Irrational, Ken and 15 other members from Irrational founded Ghost Story Games alongside Take-Two Interactive. Levine's first goal with the studio was to create a game that involves the concept of narrative Legos, a term used to create an endless, replayable, story-driven video game. Not much is known about the game in development as of yet, but many Bioshock fans eagerly await what will come next from the mind of Levine. The Bioshock series was a first-person narrative game series that changed the industry as a whole. Maybe not in the gameplay department as such, but certainly in creating more memorable story experiences that rival or beat ones shown in blockbuster movies today. Bioshock will go down as one of the most influential and exciting game series in a generation, and the series is still celebrated by fans today. With it, it spawned a new wave of narrative-focused games after its release. With the Bioshock license now in 2K's hands, who knows what the future might bring and what exactly Ken is creating with his team at Ghost Story Games.
So there's this great video. Do you guys know who Chris Crawford is? Yes, probably some of you do. So he's old school. Chris was making games on the Atari 400 back in the day. He did this epic speech about 20 years ago or something at GDC about this exact problem. How do you make a replayable narrative game really meaningfully replayable? And he called it the Dragon. This was his challenge. He identified as his dragon.
I never thought that I would see you this clearly. I always saw you in brief glimpses in the dark. But now, you're so much bigger than I'd ever imagined. And I'm not so sure I like this. I mean, yes, you're glorious and beautiful, but you're ugly too.
And he was going to slay this dragon. And at the end of the speech, you can imagine doing this now. At the end of the speech, Crawford draws a sword, an actual sword out of his, like a scabbard. And he goes, "Dragon!
For truth! For beauty! For art!"
And he runs out of the room screaming,
"Charge! Charge!"
This is a guy who's, really passionate about it.
So you're going to slay the dragon?
What?
Are you going to slay the dragon?
I'm going to slay him, or he's going to kick my ass. Like one of those two things is going to happen.